Well, it's May 22nd, and I wanted to kind of do an update on the situation. I guess the ceasefire seems to have come in place a couple of days ago and seems to be holding at the moment. So I want to kind of address that subject along with a few other items that have come up recently. So again, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe and give me a like, which will help the algorithm out, and any comments you have will be appreciated. Okay, going on to this situation. Well, it appears that you can look at it various ways. I think essentially, as far as a pure military confrontation, Israel obviously has defeated Hamas in the sense that Hamas has received unacceptable levels of damage, and Israel's Iron Dome has, I guess, largely protected their population. I think they've had 12 fatalities versus 250, a pretty morbid way to look at this in terms of a raw exchange ratio, but you know, that's the nature of war. And the question, I guess, is always the political dynamic that leads to, because obviously going into it, Hamas realized that they weren't going to be able to actually defeat the IDF with these rocket attacks. In fact, I don't think they did hardly any damage at all to the Israeli military itself, other than I think maybe as an incident where an anti-tank weapon was fired at a vehicle or something. I don't believe the vehicle was a tank either. I think it was a soft vehicle. But the point is that you know, the objectives were largely political, and there's a variety of issues involved. There's the shiny object of some incident that occurred around the mosque and Al-Aqsa Mosque and all that, and that's creating some domestic rioting in Israel. I think the bigger issue, I still think, as I said in the other videos, is the political battle for control inside of the Palestinian community itself between the Abbas faction on the West Bank, which have continually defer elections, and therefore they're kind of ruling as a regime, and the terrorist organizations of Hamas and the Gaza Strip, which are ruling by fear and intimidation. So in reality, the Palestinians are kind of a captive population of all the major forces in the area, and have very little say in the whole matter themselves on the street level, and are, however, the willingness to continue to engage in this stuff. I mean, on the West Bank, you have, I guess, kind of a lot of young punks that like to throw rocks at and use slings and attack Israeli troops that only to be responded to with rubber bullets and occasional live ammunition, and that sort of thing. But basically, we'll see if this actually unhinges any political process. I think the biggest effect it might have is it might make it almost impractical for the more moderate to left segments of the Israeli population to bring the Israeli Arabs parties into a coalition government. And if that's the case, that probably means a new right-wing government of some sort, regardless, initially, I guess, led by Netanyahu, although he has his own legal issues, and I have no idea how that's going to play out in the Israeli legal system. As I understand, the Israeli legal system is kind of a triumphant judge system as opposed to a trial by jury system, and I really don't have any idea what the actual legal validity of the charges are either. It sounded to me like kind of a political hatchet job, but then again, you know, it's like he had a gift of cigars or something, or he tried to influence a news organization. But I mean, isn't that normal? But maybe they have their own rules on it, which I'm, again, not that familiar with those details. But the point is, I would assume, though, that even if he is forced to step down, that some other member of Likud, whoever's number two, would presumably pop into place and become the new prime minister, if in fact if they're the coalition government. And I think this attack might have the tendency to push things in that direction. But we'll see about that. On the other aspect is, it seems that the Biden administration has been largely in favor of Israel and has resisted pressure from Tlaib and Omar of the Squad, who are anti-Israel, and obviously they're Islamic supporters and obviously supporters of Hamas and the terrorists, and known anti-Semites as well. So that that is probably good for Israel. It's turned out that way, and that basically the situation will remain stable in that sense. The good news for Israel is it didn't expand to a wider war with Hezbollah from the north joining in, which would have given a lot more complications, and the combination of rocket attacks from both groups could have overwhelmed the Iron Dome system, and that would have forced inevitably a large mobilization of the Israeli reserve military and a major conflict, which I suppose nobody really wants here. But if the Iron Dome system were to be overwhelmed, there'd be no choice but to go in the ground level and knock the stuff out finally. And that would be a high casualty affair, obviously, compared to what we've had here. And so it's fortunate that that didn't occur. And there's an attempt by Bernie Sanders and Tlaib and on the House side, Omar, to block a sale of Israeli weapons, U.S. weapons to Israel, some $700 million worth, which I think are mainly, they're talking about precision-guided bombs, probably the JDAMs and that sort of thing. And basically, of course, I mean, do you really want that? If Israel didn't have precision-guided bombs, then they'd have to use ordinary bombs, and the likelihood of misses and far higher collateral damage would go up. I don't think it would change anything if they're under intense rocket attack. They'd have to do what they have to do. And so, but that's typical of our left. So far, I think the Democrat Party, although it's kind of in a state of indecision about what to do about this sort of thing, very weak responses to these radicals. But I also think that the divisions are real, and the Republican Party will stand with Israel. So I don't think any such resolution will pass the Congress. So Israel will probably get their resupply that they need at this point. And of course, the big issue on this gets into the nuclear discussions with Iran, which is kind of in the backdrop of all this situation, not being discussed as much as we've been focused on the Gaza Strip activity. But this is probably the most significant thing, is the issue to which, the tact to which we're dealing with. Will Iran become a nuclear power? I mean, they're already developing the weapon systems and the missiles necessary to deliver them, which is probably the most significant factor. Them simply possessing a bomb would probably be not that significant if they didn't have the ability to effectively deliver it. And so, there's a lot of discussion about the levels of uranium enrichment that the Iranians are pursuing. The 20% level is key. However, my understanding is that once you actually enrich from a natural 0.7% of U-235 to 20% U-235, that the additional refinement steps to get to weapons grade are actually really easier. I mean, it's only several more cycles to get there. There's a lot more cycles to get to from 0.7% to 20%, that is, to get from 20% to, let's say, 90. And so this is, I sometimes get the idea that either Iran already has a nuclear bomb, or they simply are holding back for political reasons in actually making it. In other words, at this stage, I don't know what would actually prevent them from making a nuclear bomb, really. I mean, whatever the theory and the technology to do it was, and even though a few scientists have been assassinated, presumably by Israeli agents, the simple fact still remains that they probably have the data and the calculations, and other people, their understudies, probably can carry out the final step. I mean, the other aspects are the purely technological or more engineering aspects. There's a lot of details in actually making these things, which I think is probably what the most of the sensitive material that's protected by security regulations really involve. I'll say, for the record, I have never had any access to any official information on this subject, so just if anybody has any confusion about that, but I'm fairly knowledgeable about what's in the open literature, let's put it that way. And so, anyhow, the question is, why hasn't Iran had a bomb already? Is it just because they're stupid? Or is it because they can't do it? Or because they really have politically decided that they're better off in being in the gray area of being near the bomb, but not actually having crossed the threshold and getting maybe the more international blowback that you'd get from that. They may be sort of having their cake and eat it too. The other aspect, I think, is that, I mean, does Iran really want to launch a nuclear attack on Israel? First of all, it's impossible to destroy the Jewish population of Israel without killing a lot of Arabs and Muslims too, first of all. I mean, if you bomb Jerusalem, with a nuclear bomb, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is incinerated. A lot of Muslims are killed. Perhaps Tel Aviv might be different, but even there's Arab populations around there, and certainly a lot of Arabs in Haifa. So my point is, do they really, and besides that, the Israeli retaliation would probably level most of their major cities, so do they really want to do that? I mean, it's all good to say so in some fiery speech, but to really do it's a whole different issue. And I think there'd be a lot of incentive on the part of the Russians to try to rein them in on that too. After all, if Israel really were to go down, I don't want to get too deep into this kind of morbid thinking, exactly who might they strike back against? I don't know. In fact, the same thing's true about the United States, actually. If the United States got in a nuclear war with, say, Russia, would China be immune from retaliation as well, or would we agree to sit back and let China rule the world then? These are always issues about nuclear strategy that are pretty morbid, but at the same time actually relevant to what the actual plans are, which have to be made before the war commences pretty much. And that's why I guess these things are kept so secret, among other reasons. But at any rate, I may have gone a little overboard here on this, but you get the idea. Then we have the other aspect that we're having anti-Semitism and violent attacks on Jews in the United States breaking out on the part of, I guess, mostly Muslims in this country, and perhaps others as well. I think there's always been a lot of African-American anti-Semitism too. You also have the Farrakhan movement. I always find it amazing that this mythology that the left puts out that the African Americans have no prejudices. It's just white people. When you consider they're probably the most prejudiced people around. Now, there's reasons for it, including the history of oppression. I got that, but at the same time, they have a lot of hostility to people that really aren't oppressors, including Chinese. I mean, most of this anti-Asian violence everybody's talking about is being perpetrated primarily by African Americans, right? And that's what's kind of interesting, that they got this bill, which they're not really playing this up very much. But yes, there's that incident in Atlanta, but they 8 murders. But remember, this was not so much a racially motivated crime as a mentally disturbed individual who had a massive psychological conflict between his religious views and his sexual appetites, you might say. And that conflict led to a psychotic attack, and I'm sure he will get the full extent of the law. But whatever that is, basically he's either going to get life without parole or death, depending on whether the jury wimps out or not. But at any rate, but that's the exception that sort of proves the rule. If you really look at where most of these anti-Asian attacks are, the bulk of them are not fatal. The bulk of them are very viciously violent. And they're not being perpetrated by your stereotypical, white racist person that they keep talking about. At any rate, this kind of anti-Semitic violence, getting back to the real topic, is maybe a growing concern here in the country. And it seems to me that there's a little bit of silence on the part of our Democrats that want to always jump onto these hate crime issues. They really don't seem to be addressing this with quite the vigor that one would expect. So, or that we should say they deserve, because this should be completely opposed by all people of good conscience. After all, even in the Jewish population in this country, there's a lot of differences of opinion about Israeli actions and so forth. So there's no unanimity there either. So at any rate, street violence, always a bad thing. So anyway, I just kind of want to bring you up to date on what I'm thinking about these issues and where it goes from here. I guess the question is, will this lead to any, big peace movements? And I tend to think not, because basically the Palestinians are unable to accept peace. I mean, they were offered the 2-state solution on a silver platter by Bill Clinton back in 2000 with a liberal Israeli government prepared to accept it, and they totally rejected it. So, and went to a 2-year Intifada riots over it. So I don't think that things have changed for the better here either. Yeah, and so I think, anyway, so that's about it for today. I just kind of wanted to kind of update on this and kind of give you my views on a variety of issues related to it. So until next time,